Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are doing great and well. Good to see you on for part of our lunchtime series for the Irish Social Enterprise Network. We're delighted to have Sandra Velthuis from White Barn Consulting to talk about maximizing the social impact of your social enterprise, something that I know so many have been looking for and need help with, and why not get the experts in the field. So as ever, welcome. You don't have to have your camera or your microphone on. In fact, if you could leave them off, that would be even preferable. If you do have any questions throughout all this, though, please do use the chat box. We're going to have our webinar in a few minutes. I'm going to introduce you to some things that we're doing in the Irish Social Enterprise Network while we wait for other people to log in. So for the first 5 minutes, just going to tell you about some of the things that are going on. We have a recording today, by the way, so we will be recording this session, and we will be able to add them all to our YouTube channel as we are putting them all up. We will announce when we do that and we release them. This is part of a series, so every alternate Tuesday, every fortnight, we have a webinar, we have a check-in. And so we encourage you to use the same link every week, as it has been for months, to log in, to check in, to see where you're at. If there's any help that we can point you in the direction of to get your ideas off the ground or to support your social enterprise. Also, we do social enterprise clinics. So socient.ie/clinics. If you want to spend 30 minutes or so with us, we're able to maybe go through some challenges that you might be facing or some ideas you might have. More than happy to talk to you about them. We have a number of local social enterprise networks that are up as well. So I know that we've got some people on from Mayo. We have our next Mayo local social enterprise check-in and networking session on time management on Thursday, the 10th of September at 12. That's in 2 days' time. So if you're from Mayo, register for that, socient.ie/local. We also have social enterprise supports. We're actually delighted to join up with the Atlantic Social Lab again to provide some support with Cork City Council. We are running 2 webinars for anybody who's in Cork, and we will also be running some social enterprise supports through clinics as well. There's 15 places that are full. So if you are from Cork and you're looking for extra support, we are able to provide some clinics and some additional networking sessions. We actually have our first webinar for Cork on Friday, on the 11th of September at 10 o'clock in the morning with Caroline Egan, Managing Director of Cramden Tech, talking about all of those beautiful things that I know you're all experts on, planning your finance and funding in uncertain times. Just if it isn't clear, we are currently in uncertain times. We're also running our Twitter hour, SoSendIRL, which is our hashtag. So every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, please do log in, and the conversation. We have been inundated with such incredible people, and we've met such a diverse group from all across Ireland just through the Twitter hour. So if you aren't already on, do check it out. If you've got marketing, we want to find out about what you do, and it's a good way to highlight and talk and open up discussions. We also run the BuySocial.ie website, and if you are not on the BuySocial.ie website, why not? Please do consider registering with BuySocial. It's a directory of social enterprises in Ireland, and we will be announcing more and more things. So now is the time to get registered and log in. But we are not embracing remote working. We are maximizing the social impact of your social enterprise with Sandra Velthuis, and I deeply appreciate Sandra taking the time to come on to us today about this particular topic. Sandra, are you there?
I am here. Look,
Sandra,
it's working. Hey.
Delighted.
Hello, everybody.
Sandra, you are an expert in the field, and you've been involved with community and voluntary sector organisations and Volunteer Ireland, Carmichael, etc. For a good number of years, and you are assisting with so many different organisations that you are no doubt the expert in Ireland. So we really appreciate you having come on here today. So thank you so much for being involved. I'm just going to switch over the presentation. So Sandra, if you could just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be great. Or
Well, first of all, I want to say I don't really think I am an expert. I just spend more time thinking about this than anyone else. This is like impact is a hard thing, and and I'm just still struggling along with it, the same as everybody else. But maybe I spend a bit more of my time doing it. So that's the first thing. I know some of the people on this call already. The ones that I don't, the funny surname is because I'm Dutch. But I've lived in lots of different places, and I've been in Ireland for the past 23 years. Like I said, it's mainly the community and voluntary social enterprise, co-op, NGO, whatever you want to call it, that social sector that I work in. And primarily now I've been freelancing for about the last 16 years. It has been, in the recent years, it's been more and more looking at the whole area of outcomes, impact and social value. So that's where I will share a few things today. And I believe I now going to have control over your screen in a moment, Chris, is that right?
Absolutely. So for anybody, by the way, that's on this call, the way this will go, we are running this for 15 to 20 minutes. If you have any questions, please do use the chat box. We encourage you not to use your microphone, simply because when we ask people unmute the microphone, it becomes a cacophony. If you could ask the questions, we'll try and make sure that we get around to it in the chat. Sandra, I believe you might have control of the screen, and it's all yours.
We will try. Let's see if this technology is working. Okay, so here we are, and she's trying to control her screen.
It says you have it. Boom. I will let you go.
Oh, and now it's going. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, always technological things. Okay, so Chris has given me 15 minutes, and he says I'm allowed to make a maximum of 3 points, which is which is the following. I want to just mention about how important it is to understand how your social enterprise brings about change. That's a really fundamental one. Then we'll talk a little bit about measurement, but that it's more about measuring to improve your social enterprise's impact, not just to prove it. And then finally, if you're going to communicate the impact of your social enterprise, to use both numbers and words. So I'll go through each of these very, very briefly. I mean, obviously 15 minutes isn't a very long time, but you can ask some questions afterwards. So here's key point one: understanding how your social enterprise brings about change. It's completely fundamental, really, to what you do. If you don't understand that, then it's really hard to do any of those other things that I said about. So it's vitally important. And notice how I use the word change, because the word impact actually I'm just not sure it's the right word, because impact gets used so often in so many ways, and when we talk about it, it is in lay terms, in terms of language. Impact is often really quite quite a negative word, as you can see there. It can be something that's kind of quite it's instantaneous, and it can be quite destructive, and that's not really, the sort of impact you want to make with your social enterprise is probably a bit more long term, and hopefully a bit more positive than that slide would suggest. So I tend to think about it just simply as change, like you do something and something changes as a result. And like I said, hopefully that change is a positive one. And if you take away nothing else from these few minutes, I would say that's the thing to remember here. It's just, it can become very, very jargonized and very kind of, what is this? It's kind of like, that's what you're doing. It's something that you do and something changes as a result. Now, we'll give you a slightly more detailed and slightly more jargonized version, right? So this is this one. You can think of it sometimes as a chain of events. You need certain resources. You need to invest in certain resources to enable you to do certain things, right? And those things are money, people, premises, that type of thing. The activities is the stuff that you actually do, the stuff that you find really quite easy to talk about. It's the services that you provide, the goods that you sell, that sort of thing. The outputs are the things that result immediately, that happen straight away, and they're very easy things to count quite often. The outcomes are what happens after that, more medium term, some of the changes that we're talking about. And then impact really is at the end of that chain. It's the broader, longer term consequences. So that's the, that's, like I said, that's a slightly more, like I say, jargony version. But it's worth thinking about that. But if nothing else, go back to that simpler version. Now, to start that whole journey about understanding the impact is kind of like to be really, really clear what particular social, environmental, or economic problem you're striving to address. Sometimes it's a combination of those. And that might seem really, really obvious to you. You might be really tempted to start talking straight away about what the stuff is that you do. But it's not necessarily that obvious to other people who aren't ensconced in that issue, in that cause, in that problem the same way that you are. So it's really, really important to spend some time on investigating what the problem is and articulating the actual challenge, and to be really, really specific about that. And I find that social enterprises that really, really focus on that end up being much clearer about what they need to do, and then also how they evaluate whether or not they're successful in that. Then the end point of that whole journey is, well, I suppose it's that impact piece, right? But rather than just calling it impact, like just think about what things would be like if the issue was eradicated, or at least eased. Sometimes it's not entirely possible to eradicate a problem, and it's usually the problem flipped around, you know, and that's your end goal. So now you have the start of the journey and you have the end of the journey, and then you need to be able to articulate how you get from A to B, right? And sometimes what's a way of doing that might be quite handy is to use something called a theory of change, or a logic model, or a social change model. I don't care what you call it, but again, to have clarity about the steps that you need to go through to get from A to B. Now, when you're doing that, it's very easy to become to oversimplify it, because, you know, it's so I quite like this cartoon. It's kind of like, you know, it's just not that clear what those intermediate steps are. But it's also very easy when you get into it to overcomplicate it, and still nobody has a clue what's going on. So it's kind of like you need to get a happy medium between those two things. And obviously there's a lot more to say about this whole process, but if you can understand what the end goal is, then you should be able to work backwards from that and know what the intermediate steps are, and that's how you create impact or create change. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. The second point is about measurement, because as soon as we start talking about impact, automatically, almost invariably, people start talking about measurement. Now, understanding what impact you have and how you achieve that impact, as I've already said, is the most important thing. But we have a bit of a conundrum there, right? Because you need to be delivering impact. This is where the majority of your effort and time and everything needs to go. So that is the delivery of impact is more important than measuring it. But if you don't measure, then how do you know you're actually having that impact, and how do you know you're making the biggest possible difference that you can? So that's a bit of a conundrum, and as a result of that, you know, measurement does matter. But I feel quite strongly that if you're going to go to the effort of measuring, don't just do it to prove yourself to people externally. This is what we get all the time. I need to be able to measure my impact so I can prove to a funder or an investor or whoever it is that we're doing a good job. And certainly, once you figured all that out, certainly shout that off the rooftops. But in the meantime, I believe that you should be concentrating on being the best you can be. So that's like, it's gathering metrics for yourself internally, to figure out where you're doing things well and where things maybe you're not doing it so well. And if you do that, and if you're constantly improving, then you've got a much more solid picture to present to those funders and investors, you know, afterwards. So I think it's kind of like focus on improving, or using measurement to improve rather than proving. And just a little bit, oops, sorry, a little bit more detail on that then. The reason why you want to measure and to improve is ultimately about accountability, and it's about accountability to your stakeholders. It's about identifying where you are already delivering the greatest quantity of positive change and really building on that. And it's also on figuring out where you're actually delivering the least change, or you're actually having a negative effect on stakeholders. And that's the other thing that's quite often just swept under the carpet. It's kind of like impact is always deemed to be something positive, and sometimes it's not. So it's kind of like looking back and that saying, well, where are we doing that and how can we improve things there? And so I'd like to say, you need to, if you're going to be doing measurement, you gather those metrics, you learn from your finding, and obviously make the changes as necessary, because if you're not going to do anything about it, then it's not continuous improvement. So that's what I want to say about measuring for improvement. And then the third piece is about, if you're going to communicate as your impact, like I said, you now know where you're good or maybe not so good. If you're going to do that, use a mixture of both numbers and words. And the reason you want to do that is because human beings there are different types of human beings, some of which for whom the emotional stuff really appeals to them. For others, it's the less emotional stuff, and so the heart head thing. But in actual fact, most people actually want a mixture of those two things. So if people want both those things, then deliver that for them, and it really helps to give a much fuller picture of your impact. But if you're going to do that, only use meaningful metrics. Don't use vanity metrics. Don't do ones that ultimately aren't about you delivering the impact. And again, you can see I like this cartoonist. I like his view on this. This is the piece that the child welfare in this particular case. That's the important one. Yes, you might need to gather some metrics about how you're doing in terms of social media, but that's not the end result. And finally, I just want to say that. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes as well as looking at the screen. Sorry about this. I was going to say, if you're going to be gathering those metrics, start with. Have we lost the screen, Chris?
I think you might have forwarded on. It's okay. We're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about this now. Lost my train of thought. If you're going to be using it, use output data like numbers of people served. That's the sort of that's the stuff that appeals to people's heads, and then use things like stories, testimonials about how people have experienced your service that appeal to people's hearts, and you can start that at the beginning and you can build on that over time. Finally, then, to summarize, understand how you bring about change, measure to improve, not just to prove, and use both numbers and words. So that's my 3 points that I wanted to make. I don't think I'm able to, I was going to say, if we now have questions and comments, we can move into those, so do start typing away. And finally, this is me, and that's me on my website and on Twitter, where I spend far too much of my time, so please feel free to contact me at either of those two things. So that's me done. I don't know if I think
Sandra,
I've kept it at 15 minutes.
You are ridiculous. Just true to form, you are about 13 or 14 minutes. So it's just perfect for people eating their lunch and may have some questions to be able to do that. I deeply appreciate you being able to take us through because one of the challenges, and I said this to you at the start, is that people don't even know where to start. And so maybe my first question to you, given that people will know their own language of like who they're working with and their terminology and all the rest of it, what's the best start? So knowing their figures and knowing all that sort of stuff, and then and taking that first thing, that first step. Can you maybe explain, apart from contacting you, I presume, what's what resources are out there? What can people do? Where can they go for more stuff?
And are you talking, sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of that question, Chris. So are you talking about measurement? Are you talking about measurement or just being impactful in general?
I'd say people feel like they're impactful if our social enterprises are, doing that. It's where to go for measurement information.
Okay, like I said, I would just reiterate again that you need to be really, really clear on how you're bringing about change. And once you have that clarity, it'll come really, really obvious what bits you need to measure. And I think that's what people get stuck on. They start wildly looking for metrics sometimes without being really clear what bits they need to measure. So I would go back to that first point again, and being there about understanding the change process. And I would say to start really, really small. You're probably already collecting some data. So, but the data that you're collecting is probably some of the output stuff that I said, at the beginning of that chain. So, but that's important. Like if you have data on, how many people you've served, how many service users you have, how many customers you have, how many, whatever it is that you do, use that, let that be your starting point. And once you can be really, really clear on that, and actually also the inputs piece that I said, as it becomes even earlier in the chain, be clear who is everyone that's involved in making this social enterprise happen, and what resources are needed. So have clarity on those things, have confidence in that, and then start moving on. Then start saying, well, what can we say? Is there some qualitative stuff that we already know? Are there some stories? We can gather those ourselves. You don't need to ask anybody else for support on that. But then start moving and start building on that gradually. And there are loads of resources out there, but it's very hard for me to suggest exactly what you do, because if you're doing an environmental project that's trying to increase biodiversity, it's going to be very, very different from somebody who's trying to do inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities. It's very different, right? The type of metrics you use are going to be very different. But there's stuff out there. And if people don't know anything, I'm happy just to, if somebody asks me a question, to point them in the right direction. It's absolutely fine. Now or later.
Well, I really appreciate that. So moving just to the chat, if anybody has any chat, please do contact us in the chat box. Sean has a question. Is there an inherent conflict between measuring to improve and measuring to improve? Example, do you tell the story your funders want to hear, or do you tell the story that is what is really going on? It's a great question, Sean, and it's one that I'm sure everybody wrestles with. But it's to you, Sandra. Is there an inherent conflict between measuring to improve and measuring to improve?
I think we think there is, but I'm not sure that it's actually true. Because why would you pull the wool over anybody's eyes? I think we're too. I completely get what Sean's saying. I get it. I've been there. I've done that. But in actual fact, I don't think there's any point just telling the story that your funders want to hear. Because that perpetuates a really unhealthy relationship that's often built up between funders and those they fund. So I think you need to be honest about it. I think I certainly think there's a tension, but I don't think there's a conflict. And I think if you can tell them just the stuff that's working really well, and also inform them that this other stuff that they might be really, really keen on funding isn't having an impact, then actually you're the one who's progressing this issue, right? So yes, I get it. But now that does depend on the funder. I realize that some people have kind of difficult situations with their funds, but some of them are really open to hearing about it. And I think if people can start being honest about successes as well as failures, I think we can really move things along in a way that we mightn't necessarily have done up until now.
Yeah, I suppose there is that whole funding thing where people feel like, they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole all the time and trying to see if there's funders that could fund a certain thing. So you change the language a bit to make it work. So I know we're all grown up and we all have been working in the sector for a while. We all know how it goes. But I mean, being honest about what you're actually doing will eventually pay off, I presume. If you're making positive change for the service users that you've got, then it should start to show in funders' interest, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's an expectation on organizations to achieve certain outcomes that are simply not possible with the limited resources the funder is putting into them. So it's kind of like we can't allow that situation to continue in the long term. It doesn't serve those people or whatever the cause is desperately well, because we can't do it all. Yes, certainly you might sometimes have to adapt your language a little bit and all that sort of stuff. That's fair enough, but there's a difference between doing that and telling a different internal and a completely different external story.
Absolutely. So Stephen McGarry was on earlier. Thanks, Sandra and Chris, killing it as always. I presume that's a good thing. You had to go. If anybody's any questions, please do use the chat box. We will do it. But Sandra, so involved in, as you are, so many different types of organizations, what are the sort of trends that you're seeing at the moment from people who are moving from having zero recording of impact or change in service users or in stakeholders to moving, like do you see any trends at the moment, anything that has kind of caught your eye of working with organizations, moving them from not doing any of this sort of stuff to being very good? Is there any kind of things that happen from a board point of view or the way they think about it, or is there anything that people on the call could maybe think about for themselves implementing so that they will get that change?
I mean, when I was saying earlier about starting quite gradually and simply, having the output figures and some initial testimonials, that's still the most common way that a lot of organizations are presenting their impact. Like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I don't think it's enough. The other trend I'm seeing is a lot of people are using the word impact when they're not really talking about impact. They're just talking about the stuff that they do and some initial ideas of effect. But I think that is changing. I think some organizations are starting to become much more deliberate about it. Examples I can think of now, so I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's things like some of them are being slightly forced into it, if you like. So people who are being funded under, I think it's SciCap through Pobble, there are different tools now being used, like the distance travel tool and things like that. They're getting people to think more. Now, I haven't had personal experience with that, so I don't know how good or bad that particular tool is.
Yeah.
The other thing that's happening is, and our friends at Quality Matters would be able to say more about that. There's some organizations, like groups of organizations, so like say drug services or wherever, they're coming together and they're having a more unified approach to gathering metrics across different services. So that's happening. I think, and they're doing quite a lot of work with Include around that. And then the other area, which I'm particularly interested in, is that people are starting to gradually move beyond this idea. And I mentioned earlier, I was interested in social value. So that's an area I'm interested in. It's also called social return on investment. They're quite similar. And that's an area where it's it's a very robust and very deliberate and relatively complex way of trying to establish how much change is being brought about. Is it all positive and negative? And trying to actually then start saying what's the equivalent monetary value of that change. So there's that. I've been an accredited practitioner for quite a number of years, but and I've been banging on about this for a long time, but nobody was really that interested. But in recent years, there has definitely been an increase in that, and I've done like say 3 SRI studies in the last 3 years that have got quite a lot of traction. So I did something with Nafina GAA Club. I did something with CL Bleu, the organisation. It's a social enterprise that deals with exercise programs for older people. And I also just recently, there was a launch of another social return on investment report I did with a credit union. So that's kind of interesting. So people are looking at that in a very, very, like I say, deliberate kind of a way. So that's interesting. They're different sort of trends, and I think there will be. I'm sure this area is constantly evolving. Like I said, everyone's constantly struggling with it. It's not easy, so I'm sure there will be new things over the coming years as well. Oh, and the other thing is that's actually quite interesting is there's an increasing linkages between the sustainable development goals and in measuring impact, seeing how what you do maybe just in your local area actually fits in with that much broader, literally a global goals as well. So they're all really interesting trends.
Well, just the last few minutes, I really appreciate it. I was just getting some private messages just to say that you're excellent. Really appreciate that, Sandra, and people are going to potentially contact you in due course, so they want to be able to have your contact details, which we'll bring back up on the screen. And obviously we have Social Firms Wales on as well. Sad, great to have you on, which is brilliant. Last thing I just wanted to ask though is around social value, just a little bit more. We are really keen on a Buy Social initiative, and that idea that even through lockdown that people were thinking locally and they were buying socially as well, and the huge ramifications of buying socially versus buying commercially with normal channels. We want to make sure that social value becomes a thing over the next few while. So with social return on investment and social value, can you see any buy social procurement type things on the horizon? Is there anything that you've got to maybe, I'd just like to grab your thoughts on those sort of initiatives and where measuring these change processes can make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not really off the top of my head, but I think the thing to remember quite often when we do start talking about measuring social impact, we just, there's an expectation on social enterprises and charities and things like that to do the measuring piece. And actually this is something, if we're talking about social value in general, this is something that's cross-sectoral. It's also about what the state does. It's what for-profit businesses do. It's what academia does. It should be right across our society. Yeah. So I suppose that's where there's a kind of like an overlap, and it's very, like, buying social is a really easy way for different entities or individuals to generate more social value, to be, so I think it is very neat, alignment between those two things. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think you and I are very similar in this. Community and voluntary sector always feels like it's the one that has to provide all this, but everyone else has to measure it. Everyone else has to be in on the game too. You have to be aware not of just your bottom line, but your impact on the environment and also your social impact, not just including your employees, but all of your other stakeholders. And only by doing that and being more aware, you will start to see that there are opportunities to do better. And I know in our climate crisis that we have, and in our situation with social enterprises who could do with having, more income, if it's a choice between them or commercial sector, why not go in the social enterprise? They will absolutely bring it back into people who need the support, and it can make a huge difference to somebody. So yeah, I love that idea. It's the state, it's for-profit companies. Everybody needs to be doing this. It's just, I think social enterprises are far more mindful because it's kind of in our name. Sandra, it has been a delight as always. I could talk to you forever. In fact, there's 1,000,001 questions that I have myself, but I am very conscious that we try and keep these quite short, and I know other people have messaged me to say that they want to contact you directly over time. So hopefully that is of use to people who have been on the call today. So deeply appreciate it. Sandra, any last words from yourself? I'm going to leave it on your
No,
your
good luck. Don't. This is not as like. On the one hand, I said it's kind of complicated. It is complicated, but it's not. I'll just give it a start. Start somewhere. Do you know what I mean? It's better than not doing it at all. Like, you know. So just give it a go. And like I say, if you get stuck, there are loads of resources out there, and I'm more than happy if anyone wants to give me a call to, you know, and this is not, I'm not trying to generate, no, I mean, yes, if people want to do work with me, that's fine, but I'm more than happy just to answer a quick call from somebody if they've got a question, and I'm not going to charge you for that. So feel free to give me a shout if you think that would be useful, or send me an email or whatever, you know, and just good luck to everyone.
Well, I really appreciate it. As I said to everybody, if you don't already know, this is part of our weekly series. So we're deeply appreciative of you, Sandra, for coming on today, and we will be able to do that. Just last things for everybody, we are offering a number of things. So these are our social enterprise check-ins and webinars. We also run the Twitter hour and a whole host of other things. So please do consider that and join in the conversation. Sandra, a delight as always, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Oh, good luck. And thank you everybody else. That's our job for today, and we will be able to catch you next time. Thank you very much.